Hi guys. So George Eustace, the Environment Secretary, talked about international law and the prospects of an EU deal. And this is really going down some rabbit holes here.
We're joined now by the UK's Environment Secretary, George Eustace. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope you were listening to the Simon Coveney interview. He said that the EU won't do a trade deal. There's unanimous agreement on that if the UK government tries to restore measures to the internal market bill which break the law. Are you going to try and do that?
Yes, we will be putting those measures back because they are very important. They just really bring clarity to mechanisms that are already in the withdrawal agreement.
Okay, but if there are mechanisms within the withdrawal agreement, why is it necessary to break the law? Why did you agree to something if you think it doesn't have enough to succeed in its scope? It doesn't make any sense, but let's continue.
It's already an Article 16 that enables us to act unilaterally when we need to in order to protect the economy of Northern Ireland. And in addition as well, there's a commitment to good faith, which obviously we need the ability to implement.
So Simon Coveney just told me there is an absolutely unanimous view that if the UK decides to break international law, then why would the EU agree to a deal? You've just said you are going to try and restate those parts of the internal market bill. So should we assume that there's just not going to be a deal?
Well, no, I think the truth is if there is an agreement, then it supersedes really this whole debate. And that's the point that Simon Coveney was making.
He just said there won't be an agreement.
No, but if there is an agreement, then the types of issues that are causing this problem, things like export declarations and tariffs and one or two other areas.
He's just told me that there won't be an agreement.
Well, if there's not an agreement, then these powers will be needed. If there is an agreement, they won't be needed.
Okay, so this doesn't make any sense. But let me give you an analogy here, because really, this is just going down a rabbit hole, and it doesn't really make any sense. So in my analogy, I've used it before about the tennis club. So let's imagine that I'm a member of a tennis club, and I have decided, look, I don't want to be a member anymore. I want to leave. So I sit down with the tennis club and I say, look, I want to end my membership. And the tennis club said, okay, you can do that, no problem. But before you leave, you need to hand back, for example, your card to access the facilities. We also lent you some tennis shoes for playing on the court. You need to hand those back, and other things like this. And I say, sure, no problem. Okay, where do I sign? And I sign, and the tennis club sign, and they say, look, your membership is until the end of the year. You've already paid, so you can leave at the end of the year. And I said, perfectly. And they said, just before you leave, hand in these things. And I say, okay. After a few days, I decide, wait a minute, I don't like this contract that I signed. What I'm going to do is, well, I'll go back to the tennis club. So I go back to the tennis club and say, look, actually, what I'd like to do is also come back to the tennis club from time to time and play tennis. Is it possible to do that while not being a member? And they say, yeah, well, we can try and work something out. So what would you like to do? Come back on a Wednesday or a Friday? Yeah, I haven't decided yet, but I'd like to come back maybe once a week and play tennis, but not as a member. And they say, sure, okay. Well, let's work out a contract where you can come back once a week, or you can maybe access the bar, but you're not going to be a member. That's clear. Yes, I'm not going to be a member. Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else you'd like to say? Yeah, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to burn those tennis shoes that you gave me. And the tennis club say, what? And I said, yeah, remember, the contract where I had to give back the tennis shoes? But I'm actually going to burn the tennis shoes. But if you don't want me to burn the tennis shoes, what you can do is you can give me a new contract where I can come and maybe have free drinks in the bar. And they said, no, that's not part of the original agreement. I said, yeah, but I need to add this. I need to do this because the tennis shoes in my home smell pretty bad and my family don't like that. So they said, look, burn the tennis shoes. I said, okay, I need to burn the tennis shoes, otherwise my family won't be happy. But you're still going to allow me back into the tennis club, right? And they said, no, if you break the agreement, if you burn the tennis shoes, we're not going to allow you back in. I say, well, no, but you have to remember, I have to burn the tennis shoes because my family need me to burn the tennis shoes. You know, there's nothing in the original agreement that says I can't burn the tennis shoes. You say, yeah, you know, you have to return the tennis shoes. What if I return them burnt? And say, no, you have to return them in as reasonable condition as possible. This is basically what the UK is trying to do. They're trying to undermine the withdrawal agreement and still have a deal. And the EU is saying no. Now, just to extend the analogy once more, if I were to say, well, I'm going to burn them on Facebook and there are other tennis clubs around the country and they're willing to allow me in. And I say, yeah, but if they see you burning the tennis shoes, they're not going to let you in. And they've said that if they see you burning tennis shoes, they're not going to let you in. But I'm going to burn the tennis shoes anyway because I need to burn them because my family have decided this. I know it's a ridiculous analogy, but this is basically what the UK is trying to do with both the Internal Market Bill and the Withdrawal Agreement.
I think he conceded that point as well. And that's why what both sides have actually got to do is focus on getting a withdrawal agreement. We've got a withdrawal agreement, getting a free trade, future partnership agreement in place. And once that's done, then the types of measures that we needed to have there to be able to offer legal clarity in the event that there's no further agreement.
Basically, this is a shakedown. I'm going to burn the shoes unless you allow me in again. Unless you let me back into the tennis club. But if you let me back into the tennis club, then I won't need to burn the tennis shoes. Even though I said I'm going to burn them. It's a threat. He's threatening, the UK is threatening the EU, threatening the EU with throwing Northern Ireland under a bus, burning the tennis shoes, in order to be allowed back in order to have a free trade agreement.
Well, then those will not be necessary.
How likely do you think it is that we are going to get a trade?
Sorry, and just to finish, the EU saying, look, if you do this, we're not going to give you a trade deal. If you break international law, we're not going to give you a trade deal. In the same way, the tennis club saying, if you burn the shoes, we're not going to let you back in.
Well, it's quite difficult. There are remaining really two sticking points. One around state aid, where the EU are effectively, asking the UK to remain bound by their system, by their state aid rules, and that's really, unprecedented.
No. Why are you lying? Why is he lying and not being held accountable for this? The EU have not said you are bound by our state aid rules. The EU have asked, can you present what type of state aid rules you're planning to take so we can have an agreement on them? The EU have never said you're not allowed to have state aid rules. What they've said is, we need to see what your state aid rules are going to look like because we'd like to avoid unfair competition. Now, ironically, the UK were when it was a member, pushed this idea of banning or limiting state aid rules because they were afraid other countries in the European Union would unfairly compensate businesses in those countries. The EU have been very clear about this. They said, look, we want fair trade. We don't want the UK, for example, compensating their companies in an unfair way, and then those companies being able to sell into the EU and undercut European companies. Look, what's wrong with that?
for an independent country to do that. And secondly,
sorry, and he keeps using, and he'll use in this interview, independent country, independent country, independent country, in some way hoping that it will resonate with Brexiteers. Now we're an independent country. Is he? And I'd like a journalist to ask him. Sorry, you keep using the word independent country. Does that mean that Germany is not an independent country? Does that mean France or Italy or Spain or the Netherlands are not independent countries?
Of course, around fishing, where it is a feature of international law that a country has control of its exclusive economic zone.
Now you're quoting international law, but I thought you didn't have a problem with breaking it before. Isn't it ironic that the UK will say, yeah, we're going to break international law, but when it comes to fishing, the EU must respect it? Does anyone not see the ridiculousness of all of this?
Out to 200 miles or the halfway point. That's what Norway do. It's what every other country in the world does. Indeed,
I think Michel Barnier should just come out and say, you want your fishing rights protected? We're actually going to break international law. Then what would Boris Johnson say? What would this guy say? No, you can't do that. Well, but you said you were going to do it. But that's different.
It's even what the EU have. And it's absolutely right that the UK should control its exclusive economic zone as it leaves the EU.
Fishing, of course, as you say, is a huge sticking point. Simon Coveney just said that it is absolutely possible that we get to a no-deal situation over fishing. The Sunday Times reports that Britain wants to reserve at least half of the fish in British waters for UK boats. The EU says it should be less than 20%. I mean, it sounds like you're miles apart here.
Well, there is some way between us. I think the principal thing is that the European Union seem to believe that they could have, at the moment, they're arguing that they should have sort of effectively eternal access, to our waters, and that shouldn't be varied from one year to the next. And that's obviously quite a difficult sticking point. And yes, it's the case that at the moment we have about half of the fish in our own waters. The other half are given away to the EU. We want something that's more balanced, that's more scientific, that's based on what's called zonal attachment, which is where the fish actually are to be found and reside.
Okay, but as Coveney said, fish move from one place to another. Well, let me give it a different analogy here. Let's imagine that one country grows saplings, young trees. And then what happens, these trees need a particular type of soil. So they're taking out, it's a ridiculous analogy, but just to give you an idea, they're taken out of the land, taken out of the ground, and they're transported into another country where they spend another number of years and they grow to full maturity. They're eventually cut down and turned into lumber, into timber. Who owns the trees? Is it the country where they're finally harvested, or is it the country that actually grew them at the beginning? This is what I'm talking about when you need to have an agreement. Now, another problem with the analogy is that at the end, the country that actually cut down the trees and turned them into timber doesn't actually use all that many of those trees, and they actually have to export them to the country that grew them as saplings. That's why it's important to have an agreement. That's why it's important to understand that this is not a simple issue. It's a much more complicated issue. Now, what I've talked about here with the saplings is very simple, but fishing is much more complicated. There are different types, different species of fish. They have to be, their spawning areas have to be protected. There needs to be laws in order to reduce, for example, pollution, or to protect the environment in that area, so that people don't just go there and take the fish when they're too young. There need to be agreements on this. And as Simon Coveney had said in the video on Sunday, fish don't have passports. They move around the ocean, around the sea. And there aren't Irish fish or English fish or Spanish fish or Scottish fish. But what the Brexiteers are trying to tell people is these are our fish. They're in our waters, means they are our fish. The problem is that without proper agreements, the EU could decide, okay, we're not going to support the Irish fishing industry because Ireland doesn't benefit from it, because the fish travel from Ireland over to the UK. Then what's going to happen to the UK fishing industry? But this is all a bit pointless.
That's a sensible, modern, scientific way to share stocks. And yes, the EU obviously have enjoyed a lot of access to our water in the past and have taken quite a lot of fish out of our waters. I suppose it's natural that they'd want to continue that, but they do have to accept that there are certain consequences from the UK leaving the EU and becoming an independent country again.
Once again, this independent country.
On this programme, I've spoken to fishermen in Grimsby, Hastings, Withdrawal, who feel that the EU has effectively decimated their industry. So I really...
And why? Why did they think that? Could it been because the likes of the Daily Mail or Nigel Farage was convincing them of the case? I'm not a fan of the common fisheries policy or the common agricultural policy. They need to be reformed. They have been reformed to a certain extent. They need further reform. But you have to remember also that a lot of fishing, small fishing industries sold off their rights to private individuals and big businesses. So why did they do that? Is it the European Union's fault that they did that? Is it because the UK government didn't support them? Once again, we're going into the usual territory of national governments not protecting their citizens and convincing their citizens that the problem that they have is with the EU.
Want to emphasise that I do understand why it's such a totemic issue, but it also makes up less than 0.1% of the UK economy. Are we really going to blow up the possibility of a Brexit deal over fishing?
But it makes up 90% of the rhetoric. You have to remember that, Sophie. It's about the same size as the lawnmower industry, but you don't hear people screaming about lawnmowers, do you? You should hear people screaming about the financial industry, financial services industry, I should say, because it's much more valuable to the UK economy. But you understand why the politicians are talking about fishing, because there's a romantic connection to it, because it sounds, romantic. Look, these rugged people trying to survive on the sea. It's a very difficult life. It presents us in a very romantic way. We have a romantic connection with the sea, and it's great to use as a political tool. And that's what it is. It's a political tool. The Conservative Party don't give a crap about these people. They never had. They never will. They're using them as a political bargaining chip. In the same way they're using Northern Ireland as a political bargaining chip. Does anyone honestly believe that Boris Johnson cares about the people of Northern Ireland? Does anyone honestly believe that Boris Johnson cares about the ordinary fishermen? They serve a purpose. The Conservative Party don't care about people who don't donate to the party or who don't have offshore bank accounts. Excuse the pun when it comes to fishing. They are the people the Conservative Party care about. Not the working class, not people on universal credit, and certainly not fishermen.
Well, it's very important to coastal communities up and down the country. And it is the case that...
I'm sorry, I know I preempted him what he's going to say. But that's the fact of the matter. These people will tell you that they care about you, but they don't. They only care about people who donate to the party. People who are able to have, hedge funds or whatever. They don't care about the fishing industry. They don't care about the working class. They never had. They never will. Now, what's going to happen next? Is there going to be a trade deal? I don't know. I actually believe that Boris Johnson would try to salvage something at the last minute to return to Parliament and say, I have peace in our time. Victory. Here is the withdrawal. Here is the new agreement. And hold it up, because in a way, politically, he needs it. But unfortunately, I think Boris Johnson is not someone with a long-term view. He just looks at what can get me over the problem today. And it's not just Boris Johnson that has this particular vice. It's also Theresa May had the same problem. Theresa May was always, trying to get over the problem of the day. Oh, the ERG the ERG are trying to undermine me. Give the ERG something. Then let's look at tomorrow when tomorrow arrives. A terrible way to negotiate. And I fear if this is the approach that Boris Johnson is taking also with the EU, then he's not going to get a deal. The risk is that he's hoping that he can keep the ERG or the Brexiteers happy for a bit, and then he can go back to the EU and say, okay, now I'm ready to negotiate. And they will say, I'm sorry, it's too late. We've spent years trying to... we spent a year trying to negotiate something with you. And now you're deciding... you've dismissed us continually, and now you're deciding, yes, I actually want to agree a trade agreement. There isn't time, Boris. It's over. It's a bit like Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is looking at the clock and say, look, we have another 5 minutes. And the EU are saying, no, sorry, that clock is stopped, and it stopped 10 minutes ago. It's over. And I'm afraid that the UK is going to crash out without a deal because of Boris Johnson's incompetence. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.